Welcome to a deep dive on a topic that, honestly, when I first heard it, I thought, gatekeepers in the Bible, is that going to be exciting? But then I saw the sources you all sent in Bible verses, excerpts about leadership, even a whole sermon on gates, and I was like, okay, there's got to be something interesting here. So let's unlock this hidden world together, shall we?
It's easy to picture gatekeepers as, just guys with keys, but that is a huge understatement.
Right. Like, my first thought was almost comical. I was like, wait, are we about to become experts in ancient lockmaking or something?
Not quite. See, in ancient times, that city gate wasn't just a physical barrier, it was the heart of the community. Business deals went down there, legal disputes were settled there, news was exchanged, like it was the place to be.
So less guard check and more like the town square crossed with like a courthouse all in one.
Exactly. And obviously, someone needed to be in charge of that whole bustling hub. That's where our gatekeepers come in. It wasn't just about locking up at night. It was about maintaining order, upholding the rhythm of daily life in a very real sense.
And we're not talking about just any random citizen getting assigned this job, right? I mean, some of the sources mention specific families who are entrusted with this role.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the sources you sent in mentioned the Levites. They were often the ones given the responsibility of being gatekeepers, especially at the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay, so for anyone listening who maybe isn't as familiar with like the whole Levite thing, can you give us a little context? Who were they and why were they chosen for this?
Sure. So the Levites were a whole tribe in Israel, and they were specifically dedicated to religious service. They were like the caretakers of the temple, right? Played a central role in all the worship and making sure everything stayed holy. So it kind of makes sense that they'd be the ones entrusted with guarding its entrances, being that first line of defense.
Right, because it wasn't just any building, it was the temple.
Yeah,
Like the holiest site considered the dwelling place of God, right?
exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because it wasn't just about keeping out like unwanted visitors or something. It was about maintaining a state of spiritual purity. You actually sent in this really interesting section from First Chronicles 26. It goes into detail about this whole system of gatekeepers for the temple, and they were responsible for making sure that absolutely no one and nothing ritually unclean was allowed inside.
Okay, now you're going to have to break that down for me a bit because I think for those of us not walking around ancient Jerusalem, ritually unclean might need a little more explanation.
Yeah, totally. So in the context of the temple, it's about more than just being physically clean, like certain things like contact with illness or death, touching certain animals, even childbirth. All of that, according to their law, would render a person temporarily ritually impure. And they couldn't even approach the sacred space until they went through these specific rituals of purification.
Oh, wow, I see. So the gatekeepers needed to like know this whole system of laws inside and out just to do their job effectively. Oh, absolutely. Imagine, just to do your job, you have to be a walking encyclopedia of religious law. The sources really emphasize how much trust was placed in these gatekeepers.
Hmm.
They were responsible for protecting what was considered the most sacred space in their entire world.
Wow. That is some serious responsibility. I mean, it kind of makes you think about the level of knowledge and discernment that we need in our own roles today, right? So we're back, and I got to say, learning about all the ins and outs of ritual purity, definitely not what I expected from a deep dive on gatekeepers, but fascinating stuff.
Right. It really makes you think about how much we take for granted in terms of like accessing sacred spaces today. Totally. But okay, I'm curious. Their duties weren't limited to just knowing all this religious law, right? I mean, those First Chronicles verses you mentioned, they talked about the gatekeepers overseeing the temple treasures and offerings too, right?
Oh, absolutely. It was a multifaceted role for sure. It wasn't just about who got in, but also managing all the valuable stuff, making sure everything was accounted for. Talk about organizational skills.
Right. Like it's almost like they were the ancient world equivalent of, I don't know, head of security, an accountant, an event planner, all rolled into one.
That's actually a pretty accurate description.
I mean, seriously, though. And it's not like their responsibilities stopped at the temple door either, did they? Cities had gates, too, and those needed guarding as well.
Exactly. You highlighted that passage in Nehemiah chapter 7, I think it was, where they're rebuilding Jerusalem after the exile. And one of the very first things they do is appoint gatekeepers. Like, it was a top priority.
Wow, that really shows you how important this role was, even outside of, like, a purely religious context. It seems like whenever something needed protecting, a gatekeeper wasn't far behind.
It's a theme you see throughout history, really.
Yeah.
But here's where the sources you sent in get even more interesting, because they start to connect these gatekeepers to the idea of watchmen.
Okay, now when I hear watchman, I'm picturing, someone on the city walls scanning the horizon for approaching armies, that kind of thing. So how does that connect to everything we've been talking about?
It's about expanding our understanding of what it means to protect something. So yes, there's the physical aspect, guarding buildings, resources, the city itself. But these sources, they point to a deeper, more spiritual dimension as well.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about the spiritual dimension.
Well, think about it. That watchman up on the wall, he's not just looking out for physical threats. He's also listening for messages, right? Trying to discern what's happening in the distance, things that might not be immediately visible, but could be just as important, even dangerous.
Interesting. And it makes me think of that verse you pointed out from Isaiah 62, something about, "On your walls, O Jerusalem, I have set watchmen. All the day and all the night they shall never be silent." It's like they're in constant communication, not just watching, but also reminding God of his promises, even in the face of potential danger.
Exactly. And notice the qualities that are being emphasized here. Alertness, discernment, this unwavering dedication to protecting what's precious. It's not just about guarding physical space anymore. It's about safeguarding something much greater, the spiritual well-being of the whole community, their connection to the divine.
So we've gone from the practical duties of a gatekeeper to this much broader, almost metaphorical role of the watchman. It's really making me rethink those two roles in a whole new light. But I have to ask, how does this relate to us today? I mean, we're not exactly manning the city walls or guarding the temple treasures, right?
And that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because what if, in a sense, each of us is a gatekeeper of our own lives? What if we started thinking about our hearts and our minds as something precious, something worthy of that same level of protection?
Ooh, that idea of guarding our hearts. It's powerful, I'll give you that. But honestly, it's also a little daunting. Like, where do we even begin?
I think it starts with awareness, just being mindful of what we're allowing to influence us.
Yeah.
What are we consuming, both literally and figuratively? Are we surrounding ourselves with people and ideas that nourish us, that help us grow? Or are we leaving the gates wide open, letting in all kinds of negativity, distractions, things that ultimately drain us and keep us from fulfilling our purpose?
It's like that feeling you get when you come home after a long day and realize you forgot to lock the front door. That, oh shoot, moment where you suddenly feel so vulnerable.
Exactly. And the thing is, in today's world, those potential harms, they aren't always physical, are they? They can be mental, emotional, even spiritual.
So how do we become better gatekeepers of our own lives? Do we all need to go on a digital detox, retreat to a mountaintop, and only wear clothes made of sackcloth?
Well, while those things might be helpful for some, I don't think it has to be quite that extreme. It's more about making conscious choices, being discerning about what we allow to take root in our hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Like you said in that proverb, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. I mean, that's powerful. It's a good reminder that what we let in ultimately shapes who we become.
Wow, yeah. It's almost like we need some kind of guide, someone to help us navigate this whole inner world,
Yeah.
learn how to guard it effectively. And speaking of guides, isn't Jesus often referred to as a gatekeeper in the Bible?
You're right. He actually uses that metaphor himself in John 10. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved, he says. It's really interesting to think about that in light of everything we've been discussing.
It really is, but it also raises a lot of questions, which we'll definitely dive into more right after we come back. Stay with us as we explore the idea of Jesus as the ultimate gatekeeper. Okay, so we're back, and I am really feeling like my brain has expanded a few sizes today, from literal gatekeepers to this whole metaphor of guarding our hearts. It's a lot. And right before the break, we were starting to get into this idea of Jesus being called the gate in John 10. So more on that, please. I'm hooked.
It really is a powerful metaphor, isn't it? And it just adds this whole other layer to everything we've been talking about. Because on the one hand, he's the gatekeeper, the protector, right? But it's also the gate itself, the way through, the path to something greater.
So he's not just guarding the entrance to heaven, like some kind of divine bouncer deciding who gets in and who doesn't.
Not exactly. It's about something much bigger than that. Remember those watchmen we were talking about?
Yeah.
The ones who were constantly alert, always discerning what was on the horizon. Well, Jesus embodies that on a cosmic scale. He sees the dangers, the potential harms, not just in the physical world, but in the spiritual realm too.
And because he's also the gate, the way through, it's almost like he's saying, look, I see the threats. I know the way is challenging, but follow me. Trust me, and I'll guide you safely through.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of this whole metaphor, right? We're not left alone to guard our own hearts. We have a guide, a protector, who not only understands the dangers, but has overcome them. He shows us how to live, how to choose what we allow in, how to navigate this whole crazy life with wisdom and discernment.
It's interesting, though, because he doesn't force us through the gate, does he? It's still ultimately our choice to make.
That's such an important point. He invites us to follow, to trust him, but he never forces us. And maybe that's part of what it means to be our own gatekeepers, too. We have the freedom to choose what we let into our lives, but with that freedom comes this huge responsibility to choose wisely.
It's making me think back to those temple gatekeepers again. They had a system, a set of laws, to help them decide who and what could enter. Maybe we each need to develop our own system, our own set of guiding principles, to help us make those choices about what we allow to influence and shape us.
It's definitely something to consider, and it brings us right back to where we started, doesn't it?
Mhm.
Because ultimately, the legacy of those gatekeepers, whether we're talking about the literal ones or the metaphorical ones, it all comes down to a challenge. It's an invitation to really look at our lives and ask ourselves some tough questions. Like, what are we guarding? What's truly precious to us? And are we doing what it takes to protect it?
Wow. Yeah. Those are some powerful questions to sit with. And, this whole deep dive has really taken us on a journey. I mean, we started with these seemingly simple gatekeepers, and now we're talking about like the deepest parts of ourselves. It's amazing.
Quite the exploration. And I honestly think there's still so much more to uncover, both within ourselves and in these ancient stories.
Well, listeners, it seems like our time together on this deep dive has come to an end. But hopefully, this conversation is just beginning. We've journeyed through ancient cities, explored the ins and outs of the temple. We even wrestled with some pretty big questions about life, faith, and what it means to protect what matters most. So as we go from here, let's keep those questions alive, keep seeking wisdom, and keep guarding what's truly precious. Until next time, thanks for joining us.